The air was thick with smoke. The once beautiful city lay in ruins, its buildings shattered and its streets filled with dust and debris. The sound of laser blasts and explosions echoed through the city, creating a constant hum of destruction. Above, alien ships hovered like dark vultures, ready to swoop down on what remained of Earth's last defense. The war had raged for weeks. Humanity was losing. Sergeant Mark Davis crouched behind the remains of a broken wall, clutching his rifle tightly. Sweat dripped down his face, but he didn't notice. His focus was sharp, his mind clear. There was no room for fear now. He'd seen too much of the chaos and pain to be afraid anymore. His only thoughts were of survival. His team, what was left of them, had been ordered to hold this position. It was a mission they knew they couldn't win, but they had to try. Earth's last hope rested on this crumbling city, this final stand. Mark's grip tightened around his weapon as he peered through the cracked wall. Watching the alien invaders advance, the enemy was unlike anything he had ever seen. Massive and terrifying, they towered over him, their armored bodies glinting under the harsh light of the explosions. Their weapons were powerful, and their movements were precise.
Ow.
They had no mercy. They showed no sign of weakness. They were invincible. Yet, despite the overwhelming force they faced, Mark and his team fought on. They fired at the advancing aliens, but their bullets bounced harmlessly off the armored suits. It didn't matter. They had to keep fighting. There was nothing else to do. Suddenly, a loud roar echoed through the air, cutting through the chaos. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He turned, looking to the left where he had seen movement. His eyes widened in disbelief. A figure stepped out from behind the wreckage. It was an alien warrior. The warrior was huge, easily 3 times the size of a human, with dark, muscular arms and glowing red eyes. His armor was battle-worn, marked by countless scars. His weapon, a massive sword that seemed to shimmer with energy, was raised high as he charged toward Mark's position. Mark instinctively raised his rifle, but he hesitated. There was something strange about the warrior's movement.
He wasn't
Charging with the usual aggression. In fact, he looked desperate. The alien's shoulders were hunched, and his eyes darted around as if searching for something or someone before Mark could react. The alien warrior reached him, stopping just a few feet away. The creature's gaze locked onto Mark's, and for a moment, there was silence.
Ow.
The warrior's breathing was heavy, his body trembling, as if the weight of the battle had finally taken its toll. Then, to Mark's shock, the alien warrior dropped. His sword, the weapon, hit the ground with a loud clang, sending up a cloud of dust. Mark's heart raced as he lowered his rifle, unsure of what was happening. The warrior's voice was deep, but it shook as he spoke. "Please, help me." Mark blinked, not believing what he had just heard. His mind raced. This couldn't be real. This was the enemy, the force that had destroyed cities, killed millions, and almost wiped out humanity. Yet here it was. Standing before him, asking for help, Mark took a cautious step forward. His fingers still clenched around his rifle, but his mind was clouded with confusion. He had seen fear in the eyes of the alien warriors before, but never this kind of fear. This was not the arrogance of a conqueror. This was something else. The alien's voice cracked again as he spoke. I can't go back. They'll kill me." Mark's confusion deepened. What was happening? Why was this warrior, this monster, begging for mercy? For a long moment, they stood there, facing each other in the midst of the war-torn battlefield. The sounds of the battle around them faded into the background. Mark's eyes never left the aliens. He could see the vulnerability in the warrior's eyes now, the fear, the pain. Mark had heard rumors. Rumors of a rebellion within the alien ranks of warriors who had grown tired of the endless conquest, tired of the killing, but he had never believed it. He had always thought that the aliens were nothing more than monsters, driven by a hunger for power, but now in front of him stood proof that perhaps there was more to their story than he had ever imagined. The warrior's hand reached up, trembling, and held out toward Mark. "Please, just. Don't leave me to die." Mark's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't just a soldier asking for mercy. This was a soul in need of help. Mark had been trained to fight, to kill, to protect humanity at all costs. But this was something different. Slowly, Mark lowered his rifle. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if this was a trap or if he was making a terrible mistake. But one thing was clear: the warrior's plea was genuine. And for the first time in this long war, Mark wasn't sure what the right thing to do was. "Stay here," Mark said, his voice rough. "I'll figure this out." He stepped back, watching the alien warrior closely, unsure of what would come next. But for the first time, there was a sliver of hope in the air. Could this alien be different? Could there be a way to stop the war without more bloodshed? As Mark turned to face his comrades, he realized that the battlefield had changed. The fight was no longer just about survival. It was about something deeper, something more personal, and the future of humanity of Earth itself might rest on. The unexpected alliance between a soldier and an alien warrior. The city was falling apart. Explosions shook the ground, sending dust and debris into the air. Mark Davis stood frozen, staring at the alien warrior who had just dropped his weapon and begged for help. The chaos of the battle seemed to fade away, leaving only this strange moment between two enemies. Mark's heart raced. His mind was clouded with doubt. He had been trained to fight, to kill, to protect humanity. But never in his life had he been faced with a decision like this. He had seen aliens, cruel and heartless invaders, destroy cities, erase families, and wipe out entire populations. To him, they were nothing more than monsters. And yet here was one of them, kneeling before him, asking for mercy. Mark's grip tightened around his rifle, but he didn't raise it. He couldn't. There was something in the alien's eyes, something that made him hesitate. It wasn't the look of a conqueror, proud and certain. No, this was different. The alien was afraid, terrified. His body trembled, and his breath came in. Short, desperate gasps. Mark's mind flashed back to his training. He had been taught that the enemy would never show mercy, that the only way to protect Earth was to eliminate every threat. But was this alien really a threat? Is it possible that something had changed? Was it possible that this warrior wasn't just another soldier in an endless war? The sound of approaching enemy ships broke through Mark's thoughts. The war wasn't over. The battle was still raging. His team, what was left of it, was counting on him. He could hear the distant voices of his fellow soldiers calling for him to come back, to fight. They were running out of time. But as Mark stood there watching the alien warrior, he felt a strange pull. The warrior had asked for help, not for a fight. He had laid down his weapon and had shown vulnerability, a sign of weakness, perhaps. But also something Mark had never expected from an alien. Was it possible this warrior didn't want to be part of the destruction anymore? For a moment, Mark considered raising his rifle and ending it all. It would be the safer choice, the easier choice. It would end the problem quickly. But something deep inside told him there was more to this than just survival. Was this the chance to break the cycle of violence? Could he be the one to show mercy? When everyone else had given up? Mark took a deep breath, his hand shaking as he lowered his rifle. He couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger. Instead, he stepped forward, cautiously, closing the distance between them. The warrior's eyes widened in surprise, but he didn't move. He simply watched Mark, waiting. "Why?" Mark asked, his voice hoarse. "Why would you ask for mercy? You're the enemy. You've killed thousands, and now you want help? The alien?" Warrior swallowed hard, his eyes flickering with emotion. I was a soldier. We were all soldiers. But I never asked for this. I never wanted to destroy your world." Mark frowned. "Then why did you come? Why did you fight?" The warrior's gaze fell to the ground. "I was following orders. I did what I was told. But now, I see it. The destruction, the pain, the endless killing. It's not worth it. Don't. Want to die in this war?" Mark's eyes narrowed. Could this be true? Could this alien warrior really have changed his mind? Or was it just a trick-a-last-ditch attempt to manipulate him into lowering his guard? But deep down, Mark knew there was something real in the alien's voice. Something that told him this was no trap. This alien had lost everything, just like Him, just like the people of Earth. Mark had lost comrades, friends, even family in this war. The pain was the same. Mark's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. His fellow soldiers were advancing toward him, their weapons ready. They were waiting for his orders, but he wasn't sure what to tell them. His mind was spinning. Torn between duty and something else, something he couldn't quite explain. The alien warrior looked at him, his eyes pleading. "Please, I don't want to die. I don't want to be part of the destruction anymore. I can help you. I can help save your world." Mark's mind raced. Could he trust this alien? Could he trust a soldier who had fought against him for so long? But as he looked into the warrior's eyes, something inside him clicked. This wasn't just about war anymore. It was about something deeper, about humanity, mercy, and the possibility of change. Mark exhaled sharply, making a decision that would change the course of the war. He turned to his soldiers and raised a hand to stop them. "Stand down. We're not fighting this one." The soldiers looked confused, but they obeyed. They didn't understand why Mark had made this choice, but they trusted him. As for Mark, he didn't know if this was the right decision, but he knew it was the only choice he could live with. "All right," Mark said, turning back to the alien warrior. "You want to help? Then prove it. Show me you're not like the others." The warrior nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "I will." As the two of them stood together, an unlikely alliance began to form. It was a decision that no one would have predicted, but it was one that might just change the fate of Earth and the fate of the war. Mark sat down on a piece of broken wall, his eyes never leaving the alien warrior in front of him. The sounds of battle still echoed in the distance, but for the moment, the war had paused between them. The two of them, an enemy and a soldier, were now in a strange silence, one filled with more questions than answers. Zelter. The alien warrior stood motionless, his once proud figure now hunched, as if the weight of everything he had done was finally catching up with him. His glowing red eyes flickered in the dim light, and for the first time, Mark noticed something different about him. It wasn't just fear, it was regret. The warrior's body, once filled with the strength of a killer, now seemed fragile, broken. He had lost more than just battles. Mark shifted uncomfortably. He didn't know how to begin this conversation, let alone what to ask. He had never thought he would be sitting down to talk with an alien, let alone one who seemed to be pleading for mercy. It was all so wrong, and yet the strange pull in his gut told him there was more to this story than he could imagine. After a long pause, Zelter's deep voice broke the silence. "You wonder why I'm here? Why I'm not fighting? Why I'm not killing?" he said, his words slow, heavy with emotion. "But the truth is, ... I've seen too much. I've been a part of something that I can't undo." Mark stayed silent, letting the warrior speak. He wasn't sure if he should ask more questions or just listen. The alien had already shown more vulnerability than he had expected, and part of him wanted to understand what had turned this once mighty soldier into a broken man. "I wasn't always like this," Zelter continued, his voice tinged with sadness. "When I first joined the war, I believed in it. I believed in the cause, in our people's mission to conquer and expand. We were taught that we were superior, that our way was the only way. We thought we were bringing order to the universe, that the destruction we left in our wake was necessary." Mark frowned. It was hard to imagine. They had always seen the aliens as invaders, ruthless and heartless. But hearing Zelter's words made him realize that this warrior, this soldier, had been a victim of the same lies he was now fighting to end. They weren't just enemies, they were pawns, like him, caught in a game of power and violence. Zelter's shoulders slumped further as he continued, his eyes looking far away, lost in memories. "I've destroyed countless worlds. I've watched as families, innocent people, were wiped out because they stood in our way. I've killed without hesitation, without thinking twice. It was what we were trained to do." Mark's heart tightened. He couldn't imagine living with that kind of guilt. The faces of the people he had lost in this war flashed before his eyes, their smiles, their laughter, their lives. Were the aliens all like this? Were they all victims of a system they couldn't escape? But then Zelter whispered, almost to himself, I saw something different. I saw a world where people fought not for power, but for each other. I saw humans, fighting not for destruction, but for survival. And in their eyes, I saw something I had never known. Hope. Mark's breath caught. It wasn't the words of an enemy. It wasn't the words of a conqueror. It was the voice of someone who had seen their whole world fall apart. Someone who was questioning everything they had been taught. Zelter's eyes turned back to Mark, intense and searching. That's when I realized I didn't want to be a part of the destruction anymore. I didn't want to kill for a cause that wasn't mine, but by then, it was too late. My people had already made me a weapon. Mark felt a lump form in his throat. He had heard of soldiers breaking away from their ranks before, but never like this. Zelter wasn't just a soldier who had defected. He was a warrior who had seen the truth and was now trapped in the guilt of his past actions. The weight of the destruction he had caused was something Mark couldn't fully understand, but he could feel it in the air between them. Zelter took a step forward, his voice soft but full of conviction. I've seen enough death. I've been part of enough death. But this, this war, your war, it has shown me that there is a different way. I want to be part of that. I want to help. I want to fight for something worth saving. Mark's mind raced. Was this real? Could Zelter really be telling the truth? The soldier in him wanted to question every word, to be skeptical. But the man in him, someone who had lost everything in this war, understood. This wasn't about soldiers or enemies anymore. This was about two beings, two souls, standing in the ruins of a broken world, asking for a second chance. Mark exhaled slowly. You want to help us? After everything you've done? Zelter nodded, his gaze steady. I want to help you rebuild, not destroy. I want to be a part of the future, not the past. Mark didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if trusting Zelter would make a difference in the war or if it would get them both killed. But for the first time since the war began, he felt like he was looking at a chance, an actual chance to make things right. You're not the enemy anymore, Mark said quietly, the weight of his decision heavy on his shoulders. But you've got to prove it. You've got to show me you mean it. Zelter's eyes lit up with a spark of something Mark hadn't seen before, hope. And for the first time, Mark believed it. Just maybe this alien warrior wasn't a threat. Maybe he was the key to something greater than either of them could have imagined. The battle raged on in the distance, but for Mark and Zelter, time seemed to slow. The sounds of war, the booming explosions, the sharp crackle of energy blasts felt miles away as they sat together in the ruins. The air around them was thick, with dust, but Mark couldn't shake the strange feeling that something had shifted. Something bigger than just a fight. Zelter's words echoed in his mind. I want to help you rebuild, not destroy. Those words should have sounded like a lie, a trick. But they didn't. There was a sincerity in the alien's voice, a raw honesty that Mark couldn't ignore. Could he really trust this warrior, the same creature who had torn apart cities and slaughtered innocent lives? Mark glanced over at the alien, who was standing, looking out over the battlefield. His posture was different, no longer the proud warrior ready for destruction, but someone who was weary, tired of the bloodshed. Mark couldn't help but wonder what had brought about this change. What had Zelter seen to make him so desperate to end the war? Before Mark could ask, a sudden shout broke through the silence. The human soldiers, still fighting further down the street, were under heavy fire. The enemy ships had circled back, and their relentless attack had left the human forces scattered and vulnerable. The chaos had returned, and there was no time to think about the past. It was time to act. Mark turned to Zelter, his heart pounding. We need to help them, he said quickly, his voice urgent. The alien warrior didn't hesitate. Without a word, he grabbed his massive sword, its energy pulsing with power, and turned to Mark, his eyes determined. Lead the way, Zelter said, his voice low but resolute. Mark wasn't sure what had just happened. In that moment, Zelter wasn't the enemy anymore. He wasn't an alien invader. He was an ally, standing beside him, ready to fight for the same cause. They didn't need to exchange words of trust. They were bound by something deeper now. It wasn't just about survival. It was about redemption, about fighting for a better future for both humans and aliens alike. They moved quickly, heading toward the front lines, Mark's heart racing as they approached the battle. The sight was a grim one. Human soldiers were scattered, some wounded, others pinned down by enemy fire. Alien ships hovered in the sky, their cannons flashing with deadly precision. But through it all, Mark could see something in his comrades' eyes. Desperation, yes, but also determination. Zelter stepped forward first, his massive frame charging into the fray with an unexpected grace. His sword cut through the air, crackling with energy as it tore through enemy armor. The aliens, who had once been unstoppable against human forces, now faltered in the face of the warrior's fury. Mark watched, astonished, as Zelter fought. Not like an invader, but like a protector. Each swing of his sword was precise, each movement deliberate. Mark, though still unsure of Zelter's true loyalty, followed suit. He fired his rifle at the approaching enemies, covering the aliens' back. Together, they moved in sync, human and alien, once enemies. Now fighting side by side as they pressed forward, Mark noticed something else. The enemy aliens, those who had once fought with pride and brutality, were now hesitant. They were clearly confused by the sight of one of their own, fighting for the humans. Some hesitated, their weapons lowering slightly. Others seemed to falter, as if unsure whether to fight or flee. The tide was beginning to turn. "Don't stop now," Mark shouted. To his fellow soldiers, "We've got this." He pushed forward, his heart swelling with the realization that, for the first time in this war, they were winning, not just because they had better weapons or more soldiers, but because they had something the enemy didn't. Unity. Zelter's presence was no longer just a shield. He was a symbol. He had broken free from the chains of his past, from the lies and the orders that had once defined him. He had chosen to stand with humanity, to fight for something more than the endless cycle of violence.
Oh.
And in doing so, he had become an unlikely hero, one who had turned the tide of this battle with his courage and his willingness to change. As the battle continued, Mark found himself fighting alongside Zelter in ways he hadn't imagined possible. They were no longer just soldier and alien. They were partners, bound by fate, fighting not just for survival, but for a new future. Future where humanity and alien species could work together, not as enemies, but as allies. The battle raged on, but Mark knew one thing for sure. The war was far from over. But this moment, this act of unexpected unity, had changed everything. Together, Mark and Zelter had opened the door to a new possibility. It was a small victory, but it was a victory that meant everything. And in the heart of that war-torn city, surrounded by enemies and allies alike, two warriors stood side by side, bound not by blood or by race, but by the shared hope that peace could be won, even in the darkest of times. The battlefield had become a blur of noise and chaos. Mark's rifle had long since run out of ammo, and now, all he had was the weight of his decisions and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Around him, the war raged, but something felt different. With Zelter at his side, the human soldiers had been able to push back the invaders. It felt like they had the upper hand for now, but the enemy wasn't done. They had only retreated temporarily, and everyone knew it. Mark's eyes scanned the horizon as another wave of enemy ships appeared in the sky, their dark silhouettes blocking out the last rays of sunlight. The air was thick with tension. Zelter stood beside him, his massive frame a beacon of strength. The alien warrior's energy sword crackled with power, his eyes fixed on the approaching ships. There was no fear in his gaze, only resolve.
What?
But beneath that exterior, Mark could sense something else, something darker. The warrior had a plan, one he hadn't shared with anyone yet. "We're not done," Mark said, his voice steady though. His heart was racing. "We've pushed them back once. We can do it again." Zelter didn't respond immediately. He was staring at the enemy ships, his fists tightening around his weapon. Finally he spoke, his voice low and serious. "There's a way to end this, but it will cost me." Mark turned to face him, his heart skipping a beat. What do you mean? We can win this together. The alien's eyes met Mark's, his expression unreadable. I'm not just fighting for you. I'm fighting for myself for redemption. But to make this final blow, to ensure that the rest of the invaders retreat for good, I must use the core of my ship. It's a weapon of mass destruction, a device, powerful enough to destroy their command center, but using it will end my life. Stomach dropped. He hadn't expected this. No. We'll find another way. We don't need to sacrifice you. Zelter shook his head slowly, his voice calm. You don't understand. I've killed too many. I've been a part of this destruction. For far too long, this is the only way to make it right. It's my redemption. Mark's mind raced. The thought of losing Zeltar now, after everything they had been through, was unbearable. The alien warrior had become more than just an ally.
Yes.
He had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that change was possible, even for those who had been a part of the destruction. Mark had seen the warrior's humanity, his pain, his desire for redemption. But this was a sacrifice too great. Mark couldn't let it happen. Not after everything they had fought for. You can't do this, Zelter, Mark said, his voice rising with urgency. There has to be another way. Okay, we can fight them back. Together. We're stronger now.
Oh.
Zeltar's gaze softened, and for a moment Mark saw something new in the warrior's eyes. It wasn't just the cold calculation of a soldier. It was something deeper. A sense of peace. I have made my choice, Zeltar said quietly. This is not just for your world, it's for mine too. I am not asking for your permission, Mark. I'm asking for your understanding. I have spent my life as a weapon. But now, I will die as a protector. Mark took a step back, his mind reeling. He couldn't lose Zelter. The alien had shown him the possibility of peace, the chance to break the cycle of destruction. The thought of him sacrificing himself for something so uncertain felt like a cruel twist of fate. But there was no time. The enemy ships were drawing closer. The world was on the edge of collapse, and Mark knew that this was the moment that would define the future. If you do this, Mark said, his voice barely a whisper, then make sure you don't die alone. I'm with you. We'll face it together. Zelter nodded, his expression resolute. It's not just about victory, Mark. It's about what we leave behind. I don't want my legacy to be one of destruction. I want to be remembered for something else. Mark's heart ached. He wanted to stop him, to come up with some plan to save Zelta, but the truth was clear. The warrior had made up his mind. This was his sacrifice, and it would end the war. Zelter turned away, his gaze fixed on the approaching ships. Stay back, he said quietly. This is something I must do alone. Before Mark could protest, Zeltar stepped forward, his energy. Sword raised high, the blade humming with deadly power. The warrior moved toward the heart of the battlefield, heading straight for the alien ships. The air seemed to crackle around him as he approached the epicenter of the battle. Mark stood, frozen, watching as the alien warrior prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. His breath caught in his chest. He had never imagined that this would be the price of peace, that they would have to lose so much to gain everything. As Zelter activated the core of his ship, a blinding light filled the sky, and the ground trembled beneath Mark's feet. He felt the surge of power in the air, and in that moment, he knew it was too late to turn back. The explosion that followed would shake the heavens. The sacrifice had been made, and in the end it would change the future of both their worlds forever. The ground still trembled from the explosion, the air heavy with the echoes of Zelter's sacrifice. Mark stood motionless, the weight of what had just happened settling over him like a dark cloud. He had watched as the alien warrior, the one who had chosen redemption, had given everything for the future of both humans and aliens. The enemy was retreating. The tide of the battle shifted in their favor. But the victory felt hollow. Mark's heart was heavy. He had lost a comrade, a friend, and yet as the dust began to settle and the smoke cleared, a deep gnawing feeling tugged at him. Something wasn't right. It was too quiet. The victory, which should have been celebrated, felt like the calm before a storm. And then, from the shadows of the wreckage, A voice cut through the silence. Well, that was unexpected. Mark spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. His heart raced as a figure stepped forward, emerging from behind the rubble. It was a familiar face, one he had never imagined seeing again. It was Lieutenant Carter, his old comrade, the one he had trusted more than anyone. But now, standing before him, Carter's expression was cold, calculating. There was no sign of the soldier Mark had once fought alongside, no trace of the friendship they had shared. "What the hell are you doing here, Carter?" Mark demanded, his voice hoarse, trying to mask the shock and anger that threatened to boil over. "You were supposed to be on the other side of the city." Carter's lips curled into a smirk, his eyes gleaming with something Mark couldn't quite place. "I was, but I had to make sure the job was done properly, didn't I?" Mark's confusion deepened. "What job?" You didn't think we were just going to let the aliens win, did you?" Carter interrupted, his voice low but filled with venom. "You and your precious Zelta are always thinking there's another way, always thinking you can save them all." He let out a bitter laugh. "But you were wrong, Mark. You see, I'm not like you. I understand the true nature of this war." The words hit Mark like a punch to the gut. Carter wasn't just an ally. He was part of something darker. But what? The betrayal, the truth behind Carter's actions was starting to reveal itself, but it made no sense. You were working with them?" Mark's voice trembled, the weight of the realization sinking in. "You helped them invade Earth? You were a traitor this whole time?" Carter's smirk widened, his eyes flickering with amusement. "Not exactly. I've been working with the invaders, yes, but not in the way you think. I was always waiting for the right moment, for the right people to see the truth." Mark's breath caught in his throat. "The truth? What truth?" "The truth that you were never meant to win this war, Mark," Carter said, stepping closer, his tone icy. "The truth that Zelters sacrifice your fight for peace was all part of the plan. Do you really think you can win by showing mercy to an enemy? Do you think the aliens will just leave you alone after one small act of kindness?" Mark's mind reeled. None of it made sense. He had trusted Carter. They had fought together, side by side. And now this. He'd been playing both sides all along. Carter nodded slowly, a twisted gleam in his eyes. "Of course. While you were busy thinking you could stop the war with one act of mercy, I was working to ensure the real winners would take control, no matter who fell in the process. It's the way the universe works, Mark. The strong survive. And you're too naive to see it." The shock of Carter's betrayal sank in, deeper than any physical wound. Mark's body shook with anger, with disbelief. As he looked at Carter, he realized something else. He had underestimated the depths of betrayal. The ease with which people could turn against everything they had fought for. "You're nothing like the man I used to know," Mark said quietly, his words filled with a mix of sorrow and rage. "What happened to you? How could you?" Carter cut him off with a harsh laugh. "You think this is about what happened to me? It's about what happened to you, Mark? You spent all that time trying to be noble, trying to save the enemy, and now look where it's gotten you." Before Mark could respond, Carter raised his hand, signaling to the shadows. Mark's eyes widened as a group of soldiers emerged, all wearing the same cold, determined expressions. They were armed to the teeth, and they moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Carter smiled as he turned to Mark, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "See, Mark, this is what happens when you trust the wrong people. You're not the hero of this story. You were always just a pawn." Mark's heart pounded in his chest as the weight of Carter's betrayal became painfully clear. The fight for Earth wasn't over. It was only just beginning, and now he was facing the real enemy. As the soldiers advanced, Mark had no choice but to retreat. There was no time to dwell on the shock of Carter's betrayal. He had to survive. He had to stop this. He couldn't let Carter win. But in the back of his mind, he knew one thing. This battle had just taken a darker turn. The war was no longer just about defeating the alien invaders. It was about stopping a betrayal that ran deeper than any of them could have imagined. The battlefield felt different now. What had once been a place of chaos, explosions, and unrelenting violence had shifted into something else, something darker. The sky above was no longer filled with the buzzing of enemy ships or the crackle of laser fire. Instead, it was a heavy silence, broken only by the footsteps of soldiers moving in the shadows. Mark stood at the edge of the city's ruins, his heart pounding in his chest. The betrayal still lingered, thick and bitter. Carter's face, twisted with malice, haunted his thoughts. But there was no time for vengeance. No time for anger. The real battle was still ahead. The alien invaders were regrouping their forces. Strengthened by Carter's hidden alliance, it wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about a reckoning. The enemies Mark had fought against, the ones he had believed could be saved, had turned into something more dangerous. The fight was no longer just for Earth, it was for humanity's future. For their freedom, and for everything they had fought to protect. Beside him, Zelter's absence weighed heavily. The alien warrior had given his life for a chance at peace, but it seemed that the universe was determined to test whether that peace was even possible. Mark clenched his fists. He had promised Zeltor that this fight would mean something. He couldn't afford to let the sacrifice be in vain. Mark's eyes scanned the horizon, where enemy ships hovered ominously in the sky. They were preparing for their final assault. Mark's pulse quickened as he turned to the soldiers around him. They had fought together, bled together, and now they were ready to face their darkest hour. "You know what we're up against, Mark?" said his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "This isn't just about fighting aliens. It's about fighting for our world, for our future. We fight for the ones we've lost, and for the ones still standing beside us." His soldiers nodded, their faces set with determination. They knew the stakes. They had seen what Mark had seen, the destruction, the devastation. But now they had one thing they hadn't had before: unity. But even as they prepared for the final battle, Mark knew that not all of them would make it out alive. The aliens had one final weapon, one final push, and he didn't know if they had enough strength to overcome it. It was a battle they couldn't win alone. "Get ready." Mark called to his team, gripping his weapon tightly. "This is it." As the enemy ships descended from the clouds, Mark's heart raced. He could feel the weight of the moment, the heavy pressure of everything that had led up to this. It was a fight for more than just survival. It was a fight for redemption, for the possibility of a future that didn't repeat the past. Suddenly, the ground shook, and Mark felt the explosion before he heard it. A massive blast erupted from the alien command center, sending shockwaves through the city. Mark's stomach lurched as he realized what was happening. The aliens weren't just attacking, they were destroying everything. "Fall back," Mark shouted. "We need to get to the core before they blow it all to hell." His soldiers scattered, moving quickly through the wreckage. Mark pushed forward, the chaos around him blurring as he focused on his goal. He could see the alien command. Center in the distance, a massive fortress of metal and energy, pulsing with power. It was their last chance to stop the invasion to destroy, to the heart of the alien force and end the war once and for all. But as he neared the command center, something caught his eye. The smoke and dust, he saw a familiar face, Carter Marks. Pulse quickened as he realized the treachery that had been set in motion. Carter wasn't just a traitor. He was the one behind it all. The one who had manipulated the entire situation to serve his own ends. "You," Mark shouted, rushing toward Carter. "You're the one who did this. You're the one who sold us out." Carter turned slowly, his face twisted in a cruel smile. "Did you really think I'd let you win, Mark? This war was never yours too?" "Win. I've already made my deal with the invaders." "Ah! You're nothing but a pawn in a game you can't even begin to understand." Mark's anger boiled over, but he held back. There was no time to waste on Carter's betrayal. The future was still hanging in the balance. "You're wrong, Mark," said his voice low, but filled with certainty. "I'm not a pawn, neither. Are you?" With a final, swift movement, Mark lunged forward, knocking Carter to the ground. His heart pounded in his chest, not just with anger, but with something deeper, something he had learned in the midst of the chaos. The only way to win this war was to stop fighting for power and start fighting for something bigger. For people. For peace. Mark grabbed Carter's collar and pulled him close. "You had your chance, but it's over now. We're taking back what's ours." As the soldiers surged forward to the alien command center, Mark knew this was the moment that would define everything. The battle was still raging, but now it was clear. They had a chance, a real chance, to take back their world with one final push. Mark and his team fought their way into the heart of the alien stronghold. The final battle had begun. And this time, it wasn't just about survival. It was about winning back their future.